Hi, I'm Peter Tatchell. Welcome back to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Peter Tatchell, welcome back to the Sarah O'Connell Show. You are, of course, a legendary human rights activist. How are you today?
I am struggling. Of course, I'm absolutely committed to championing LGBT plus and other human rights, but I am struggling because of the brain and eye injuries that I've suffered when I've been attacked by far-right homophobes, Mugabe's bodyguards and others. I don't let it hold me back, but sometimes, like today, it is a bit of a struggle.
I really appreciate all the work you do and the fact that you've continued on through such great adversity for decades. And this interview is going to be a celebration of your work and your career. And so to start with, I want to go back to, you were born in Melbourne, Australia. Can you tell me, first of all, when you were a kid, what did you aspire to be when you were growing up?
My big passion when I was a kid was to be a designer. You know, my passion was art and design. But unfortunately, because my parents are very poor, they couldn't afford to keep me on at school. So I left at the school leaving age of 16 and went out to work to help financially support my family. I did eventually do some art and design in a big department store in Melbourne, and again a bit when I first came to London in 1971. But basically since then, human rights has been my, pretty much full-time activity.
You grew up sadly in a very homophobic environment. What would you say to unsupportive parents or anybody that finds themselves stuck in that situation now?
Well, you're right. My parents were evangelical Christians. For them, homosexuality was a terrible sin. At the time, in the state of Victoria, of which Melbourne is the capital, homosexuality was a very serious criminal offence. It could be punished by several years imprisonment and even enforced psychiatric treatment. So it was very scary growing up gay. And when I came out at the age of 17 in 1969, I was pretty afraid, afraid of the policeman's knock on the door, afraid that my parents might turn me into the police. But I would say to anybody in that kind of situation, you will find a way out. Move to a different city, make gay friends and get support from them, contact LGBT plus helplines and counselling services. There are people out there to help and support you.
Very good advice. And so in 1971, you opposed the Vietnam War, of course, and left Australia for England. Did you find that the UK was any more tolerant than the environment you'd grown up in at that time?
Well, in the early 1970s, Britain was definitely more liberal than Australia. We still had not only a ban on homosexuality, but also bans on abortion. Divorce was very restrictive. There was widespread censorship of books and plays and films. So coming to London seemed, quite a big relief. It seemed a much more liberal atmosphere. Having said that, of course, although there had been a partial decriminalisation of male homosexuality in 1967, first of all, it only applied to England and Wales. It wasn't extended to Scotland until 1980 and not to Northern Ireland until 1982 and not to the armed forces until 1994. So, there was a liberalisation, but it was very partial and limited. In fact, by the early to mid 1970s, the number of gay and bisexual men being arrested and convicted for consenting same-sex behaviour was 400% higher than in 1966, the year before partial decriminalisation. And, it's absolutely true that I can remember in the early 70s, the police raiding bars and clubs, saunas. People were arrested for holding hands or kissing in the street. Lesbians and gay men were arrested for what they called licentious dancing. That is, a same-sex couple dancing together. That was deemed to be a criminal offence, and people were arrested for it.
Because I think people think that after the Stonewall riots and uprising that things changed automatically, but that very much wasn't the case at all. And over 50 years later, we're still obviously fighting for basic rights and freedoms that others have their entire life.
Absolutely, and there are still battles to fight. I mean, we have made great progress over the last 5 decades, but it's mostly been in the last 2 decades. Up until 1999, Britain had by volume the largest number of anti-LGBT plus laws of any country in the world, some of them dating back centuries. Yet, by 2013, just 14 years later, with the legalization of same-sex marriage, we suddenly had some of the best laws. And that seemed to be, great progress. But now things seem to have gone into reverse. The government is stalling on a ban on conversion therapy. It has kicked into the long grass plans to reform the Gender Recognition Act to protect trans people. It has failed lamentably to secure a safe haven for LGBT plus refugees, many of whom are detained in immigration detention centres, which are prisons by another name. So, there's so much more work we still have to do, although we have achieved enormous progress.
We really have, and you are a great part of many of these achievements and accomplishments, which is incredible. And speaking of which, in 1972, you helped organise the UK's very first Pride Parade. How did the community react to that at the time?
Well, I was one of about 40 people in the Gay Liberation Front who organised that first ever Gay Pride Parade in Britain. We chose the name Gay Pride as a counter to the predominant mainstream view that we were supposed to be ashamed of being gay. And indeed, many LGBT plus people were ashamed of their sexuality or gender identity. So Gay Pride was to affirm our pride, our confidence, our sense of self-worth in who we were. It was a deliberate idea or concept to try and get away from the internalized homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia that many LGBT plus people felt at that time. Now, also back in those days, most LGBT plus people were in the closet. They wouldn't dare reveal their sexuality because they feared rejection by their family and friends, by their neighbors, their workmates. They feared arrest by the police. They feared queer bashing in the streets. So the idea of holding a gay pride parade was a huge gamble. We had no idea if anybody would turn up. In the end, there were about 700 to 1,000 people. And we were very, very, very pleased. We thought this is the beginning of something. And because it went off so well, it gave us the confidence to do it again the next year and the next year. And then it just became an annual event. So as they say, from small acorns, big oaks grow.
They really do. And so the following year, you went over to East Berlin, which at the time was communist. That must have been so frightening for you. I think you were about 21 at the time?
That's right. I heard that the Soviet bloc of countries, communist bloc, were holding an international World Festival of Youth and Students, where about 140,000 young people from all over the world would be attending. I saw this as a great opportunity to take the ideas of LGBT plus liberation to other countries, particularly to the communist bloc of countries. So I managed to get accreditation as a member of the British delegation. It was done by the secretary of the delegation, who was himself secretly gay and sympathetic to the gay rights movement. But I can tell you, I was very afraid because people who protested in communist countries would get arrested, would get convicted, and often get jailed for 5 to 10 years. My hope and calculation was that having a non-communist passport, in those days I still had an Australian passport, that would give me protection. And moreover, that because this festival was a huge PR exercise, they wouldn't want it besmirched by my arrest and imprisonment. But I can tell you, I actually feared that I would be arrested and possibly spend a few weeks or months in prison. However, I overrode my fear because I want to make sure that the ideas of gay liberation got to people in communist countries, to tell LGBT plus people there who had never known about these things because it was all censored by the state media, to tell them that there were LGBT plus people out there in the world, that we were organizing and campaigning for our liberation, to inspire them to feel good about themselves and perhaps eventually to form their own movement. And indeed, that is what happened. When the news was reported of me being arrested and interrogated by the East German secret police, the Stasi, I was even attacked and beaten up by members of the British delegation who were hardline communists and very, very anti-gay. But when all this news got out, and when I managed to smuggle in lots of gay liberation leaflets and secretly hand them out, they're a mixture of English and in German as well, what happened was it did trigger the formation of the first LGBT plus movements in communist countries. So I'm really proud that I helped to show that solidarity and help take the message of gay liberation to those communist countries where these ideas were just never ever discussed and were totally and officially censored by the state-controlled media.
Really, it's incredible what you managed to achieve back then, and it must have been petrifying. I remember before the Berlin Wall fell down and what it was like there, and the fact that you still went and you still tried to help people there, to inspire them to elevate their voices and support their community.
Yeah, and I followed it up after I came back. I did stay in touch with quite a number of people in communist countries and gave them advice and support. And they secretly told me about things they were doing behind the scenes, and I amplified that. I got stories put out in the LGBT press and sometimes the mainstream press. So I did help give them a voice, even in defiance of the censorship of their own communist regimes. And I want to pay particular tribute to those LGBT plus people in communist countries who showed far greater bravery than me in setting up secret underground LGBT plus circles and organizations, really seriously risking arrest and imprisonment for many years. I am totally in awe of their courage and determination.
In 1981, you stood in the Bermondsey by-election. Do you think that the key to equality is in more representation in government?
Well, I was selected as the Labour candidate to fight the Bermondsey election in 1981, but the election itself took place in 1983.
Right.
And as many people will recall, I was banned by the Labour Party as the candidate for well over a year because I'd advocated extra parliamentary protests against the right-wing Thatcher government and advocated, protests for LGBT plus rights. This was misconstrued as being anti-parliament. I wasn't anti-parliament, but I was saying that when governments like the Thatcher government break their election mandates and pledges, when they attack human rights, people have a right to rebel peacefully and non-violently. We have a right to rebel. But the Labour Party thought that was too radical. So Michael Foot, the then leader, banned me as a candidate. And I had to fight and fight and fight with the support of many other Labour parties around the country to eventually be able to stand in February 1983 when the by-election was called. But by then the damage had been done. I mean, I was subjected to a non-stop, media campaign, mostly by the tabloids, but even some of the broadsheets, who attacked me, first of all, for being Australian, as if that's a great crime. Secondly, because I was a left-wing candidate. And thirdly, because of my support for LGBT plus rights. I think I was the first major party candidate to ever take a clear public stand in support of LGBT plus rights. And during that election, when out canvassing, I was violently assaulted 150 times. There were 2 attempts to run me down in the car. There was a bullet through my front door, and there were 2 arson attacks upon my flat. It was a very, very scary, frightening time. and sort of no wonder that I lost that election. But, you know, I stood for election because I wanted to like take the battles I've been fighting into Parliament to try and get legislation to get change for LGBT plus people, but also other human rights issues, you know, the rights of working people and trade unions, the right of Black and ethnic minority peoples, the rights of women and disabled people. I wanted to be in Parliament to champion those causes from within. So when I lost, obviously I couldn't do that. But I think the homophobia of that campaign, which many commentators at the time described as the dirtiest, most violent, and certainly most homophobic election in Britain in the 20th century, having gone through that and seen the homophobia that I suffered, it made me, you know, double down and refocus and re-energize my work for LGBT plus rights. And I'm glad to say that one of the positive outcomes of the Bermondsey by-election was that there was, after I'd lost, a big public revulsion against the way I'd been treated. And so that meant that when Chris Smith, the Labour MP, came out the following year, he was given quite an easy ride. You know, he wasn't attacked and vilified the way I was, largely because the media, politicians, and the public felt so ashamed about the way I'd been treated. So I sort of paved the way for others, and I'm really glad and so proud of all those LGBT plus MPs who've come out since and who are working for our rights and liberties.
In 1988, Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government introduced the horrific Section 28, which lasted until 2003. Why is visibility and education so important, not just for the LGBT community, but for everybody?
Well, Section 28 was the first new anti-gay law for a century in Britain. It forbade the so-called promotion of homosexuality by local authorities, such as local councils, local health and education authorities, and so on. And also the portrayal of same-sex relationships as, quote, a pretended family relationship. I mean, this is just absolutely shocking, vile language. It could have come out of the Nazi playbook. Anyway, it was passed in 1988, sadly with the support of some Labour MPs even, but it was a blessing in disguise. Well, I never would have wanted it, but it was a blessing in disguise because it brought the lesbian and gay male movements together. They'd been up until that time quite separate, so it brought us together into one united movement. It also radicalized our community. Gay pride parades prior to 1988 had been about maybe 8,000, 9,000 people. In 1988, I think it was 30,000 people. So a huge leap, and it grew and grew and grew every year afterwards. Section 28 also led to the formation of the parliamentary lobbying group Stonewall and the non-violent direct action protest group Outrage. So those were all positive outcomes. So we've got to thank Margaret Thatcher, the evil Margaret Thatcher, for those gains and successes.
That's definitely one way of looking at that. So, of course, you've mentioned you've been badly beaten countless times, had death threats, especially when you tried to do a citizen's arrest of Robert Mugabe. And you've noted too that before events, sometimes you feel really physically ill, certainly on the day leading up to them. How do you still find the courage and determination to still show up and do what you're planning to do?
Well, I have an incredible passion for human rights. I love other people. I love freedom, equality, and justice. I want to do my bit with other people to help make that possible. And, you know, I am prepared to take some risks because that's what the suffragettes did, is what the Chartists did, it's what the Black Civil Rights Movement did in America. They took risks, and through their risks and sacrifice, changes were won. Now, of course, I'd love to do it by sitting down having a cup of tea with a government minister or a police chief, but that wasn't working. So that's why we had to do non-violent direct action and civil disobedience, because people in power were not listening. Now, you're also right to say that when I do these kind of actions, I am incredibly nervous. I usually have a very powerful, almost migraine style headache from the nervous tension. I'm often shaking, my body temperature plummets, my stomach is churning over. I feel physically ill. I'm so nervous about being rumbled, like, not being prevented from, the police discovering me and me being prevented from doing the action, or being beaten up or arrested on serious charges. So there's a lot of nervous anxiety going on there. But what overrides that is my passion for justice and fairness, and my inspiration from people in other countries who are battling under much more difficult, dangerous circumstances. Activists in Russia, Uganda, Pakistan, and elsewhere, they are risking their lives and liberty to fight for LGBT plus and other human rights. So if they can take those risks, then surely so can I.
You star in the brand new must-watch documentary on Netflix, Hating Peter Tatchell. First of all, the only thing I'm ever doing is loving Peter Tatchell. But can you tell me how the documentary first came about and how you got involved with it?
Well, the director, Christopher Amos, said he was really shocked that no documentary had been ever made about my activism. So he thought it was about time and asked for my permission, which I agreed, but I gave him total independence. He had total creative control. So I had no influence over the film. It's his project, not mine. And when he began researching me for the documentary, Christopher was shocked by the scale of hatred against me. The threats to kill me, castrate me, behead me, you name it. He couldn't understand why this incredible vitriol and hatred. Obviously, it's because I rile a lot of nasty people, homophobes, tyrants, and dictators. I've taken them on, and they and their supporters haven't liked it. So they've lashed back with, very extreme, hateful messages. So that's how the title Hating Peter Tatchell came about. The filming began not until bits and pieces in 2016. Then no British commissioner would touch it. None of them were interested. So Christopher went back to his homeland of Australia and very quickly got the interest of a production company there, Wild Bear Entertainment, and they took it up. The filming of the main master interviews with people like Ian McKellen, Stephen Fry, Elton John, and so on, that all took place in early 2020, so a year ago.
Speaking of which, Elton John and David Furnish executive produced the documentary. What are they like to work with?
Well, I didn't actually work with them. I did liaise with them a bit, but basically they were working directly with Christopher Amos, the director. So he was the guy who liaised with them, and their input to the film was really great. And I think them being on board helped us to get the deal with Netflix.
And so Sir Ian McKellen also narrates the documentary. How long have you two known each other?
Must be stretching back 3 decades, but we've known each other particularly well in the last 2 decades. Obviously, he was involved in Stonewall, and he's a great supporter of Stonewall, but he also admires my work as well. Perhaps not every single thing I've done, but overall, he's supportive of what I'm doing, and the fact that I've sometimes needed to be a bit provocative and confrontational, because when people in power won't listen, when they close their hearts and minds, you have to get a bit more uppity. Every social movement in history, when faced with intransigence by those in power, has resorted to the kind of non-violent direct action and civil disobedience that I've undertaken. And I've got to say that much of the inspiration for my own style of activism is actually borrowed from the Black Civil Rights Movement in America. When I was growing up and coming out as gay in 1969, in my hometown, there was no LGBT plus movement. not even any helplines or counselling services. So I had no reference point. In that situation, I looked to the Black Civil Rights Movement as the example of how to do things. And that model of non-violent direct action and civil disobedience has been my template ever since.
Your documentary on Netflix has been out for a couple of weeks now. What's the reaction and feedback been like?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. In fact, I think I'm being swamped by an average of about 2,000 messages and requests every single day.
Not just from me.
Which is all just impossible to cope with. I'd love to reply to every single person and thank them because their kindness and support means so much to me, but it's just physically impossible. I have replied to some of them, as many as I can, and I put out a couple of generic thank yous on Twitter and Facebook and so on. But I just wish I could thank them all because their support means so much. And of course, kindly, many of them are retweeting my own tweets about the film and posting their own comments, and sometimes posting photographs of them with me when they met me, maybe indeed many years ago. And that's really nice as well to see some of those.
At the moment, some governments and indeed the press are becoming increasingly hostile to the LGBT plus community, and a lot of people are frightened and exhausted. How can we empower the community and allies to do something about it?
Well, I think we have to recognize that sadly, backlash is part of the process of successful social change. Every social movement in history that has sought to make gains has faced demonization, vilification, and setbacks. And that's what we're going through now in Britain. The government is stalling on progress for LGBT plus rights. It promised 3 years ago to ban conversion therapy, or nearly 3 years ago, and we are still waiting. It promised to reform the Gender Recognition Act, and although overwhelmingly the consultation supported that, the government is basically saying no. So there are still battles to fight, and yeah, we have to pace ourselves and to ensure we don't get burned out. But we're in a situation now where it really, really is important to keep up the fight. There can be no room for apathy or complacency, and that's why hopefully on July 24th, it's not yet finalized, but on July 24th, myself and others will be organising a Reclaim Pride march in London. This is because the Pride in London parade has been postponed until September the 11th. We don't think it should have been postponed. And we also don't like the way in which Pride in London has gone. There's been a lot of criticisms that they are not listening to the community, in particular, that they're not making Pride an opportunity to flag up our human rights demands. So this march in London, it's going to very much be a party and a celebration, but there's going to be no floats, no corporates, no commercialization. It's just going to be community-based and community-led. It's going to be open to everyone. There's not going to be any restrictions on the numbers. The authorities only allow 30,000 people to march in Pride in London. We're scrapping that. We're saying it's open to everyone from everywhere to join us. And we're going to flag up key ongoing LGBT plus human rights demands, like ban conversion therapy, reform the Gender Recognition Act, give safe haven to LGBT plus refugees fleeing persecution, make sure that LGBT plus relationship and sex education is really good quality and strong and not just tick boxing. Solidarity with Black Lives Matter and people of color across the world. Those are the kinds of things we're working on. The details have not yet been finalized. If people go to my petertatchellfoundation.org website, they'll get details. Will be posted there towards the end of this month or the beginning of July. And people could also actually sign up to receive my email bulletins. And in the top right-hand corner of the homepage, there's a Join Us button. If you sign up there, give us your email address. It's totally free. We will send you a weekly bulletin about a range of different LGBT plus and other human rights issues. And we'll include in that information about this new Pride London event on the 24th of July.
And it's highly recommended that everyone does sign up, and that's exactly what Pride should be. Not a corporate event, but something for all people to not only celebrate who they are, but to raise their voices and speak about the things affecting the community and hopefully try and bring about change. So thank you for putting on this event, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
It's going to be fabulous. People are going to have a fabulous time, and at the end, we're going to have a gigantic queer picnic in a London park. We don't know which one yet, but we're working on that. You know, there'll be no stage, no singers or performers, no speakers, just a gigantic queer picnic in the park where everybody brings your own food, drink, sweets and music, and just have a DIY party in the park, just like the Gay Liberation Front did at the end of the very first Pride Parade in 1972.
Love that. And so here's a question that I ask every guest on the Sarah O'Connell Show. Can you tell me a fun fact about yourself, something we may not know? It can be a hobby, party trick, something like that.
I love electronic dance music. I'm a great fan. For me, it transforms me to a completely different sort of state of mind. Just to give you an example, I'm thinking of William Orbert's Adagio for Strings. He starts off with a classical version, the original Barber version, and then he segues into a very 125 beats a minute electronic dance music version. It's absolutely fantastic. You can find it on YouTube.
Fantastic. So go check that out. Add it to your Spotify or your iTunes playlist. Now, you've written several books over the years. Have you considered writing any more? Have you got anything in the works at the moment?
I've got about 6 books in the pipeline, but I've never got any time to write them. I'm thinking of doing, well, I'm planning to do a rewrite of the Battle for Bermondsey, about when I stood for Parliament in 1983, to coincide with the 40th anniversary in February 2023. I've made some progress on the rewrite, but not nearly enough. I'm going to have to get my skates on. But I won't give anything away, but there'll be a lot of new things in that book about, I wasn't able to talk about the relationship that I was having at the time with someone very prominent, a very prominent sports person. But I will reveal all in the book. And there's quite a few other things as well that will come out. I think it hopefully will be a good, entertaining read.
That sounds very exciting. I'm intrigued to learn more about it. Can you tell me more about the amazing work you do at the Peter Tatchell Foundation? Obviously, you have a newsletter so people can get involved.
Yeah, we are a very tiny human rights NGO. There's only me and my assistant, Pliny Sukamani, and a part-time media and communications person, Simon Harris. So we're 2.5 staff.
Wow.
About half of our work is UK based and half supporting movements overseas. About half of it is LGBT plus focused, and half is on other issues like free speech and civil liberties, democracy, democratic reform, and so on. You know, we don't get any institutional fund, nothing from the government or any foundations or corporates. So we depend entirely on donations from well-wishers. So again, on the homepage of the website, there's a little button in the top right-hand corner, donate. If you're able to, please consider making a donation, because that's how we are able to continue our work. And we think we're very good value for money. Considering there's only 2.5 of us, I think we hit above our weight in terms of getting issues out there and provoking debate and helping to bring about social change, of course, with many other people and allied organisations.
You really do. So I highly recommend that everyone supports however they can and learns more about the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Here's a question. If they ever made a movie about your life, who would you like to play you?
Well, it'd be quite difficult because my life of campaigning spans 54 years. So you probably have to have someone portray me as a young, late teenager and early 20 person. Another one maybe around my 40s, and another one now when I'm 69. So I don't know. I suppose maybe for now, probably for the period now, Alan Cumming would probably be quite good. We vaguely look a little bit alike, and he's about my age, so he might be good to play me.
Can you tell me what you might be working on for the rest of the year and beyond?
Well, where to start? We have such a packed program. So we are working with the Ban Conversion Therapy Coalition to make sure the government does honour its pledge to ban unethical, harmful and ineffective conversion therapy. We're also supporting trans people to keep pushing for reform so that trans people can self-ID to get their legal documents. You know, it has worked in other countries, in many other countries, for several years. There's no problem with it. We're doing a lot of work supporting LGBT plus asylum seekers. First of all, to get them out of detention when they're put in these centres where they're being held like prisoners. Secondly, to support the campaign to end the ban on them working, because many of these LGBT plus refugees have skills that Britain needs. They're doctors, plumbers, carpenters, teachers. We need those people. It's madness the government refuses to allow them to work. And of course, we also help a lot of individuals. We help them prepare their asylum cases. We write letters of accreditation to support them, which can be presented to the asylum adjudicator in court. We're also still pursuing our campaign to get financial compensation for gay and bisexual men convicted under historic past anti-gay laws. Some of these men were imprisoned, others were fined, many lost their jobs and their homes, some were beaten up in the streets. These men deserve compensation. Germany's done it, why can't the UK? And then wider, of course, we are supporting the democracy movement in countries like Russia, which will not only benefit LGBT plus people, it will benefit all Russians. You know, we've got to see a change in Russia so that there can be free and fair elections and full and fair freedoms like the right to protest and freedom of expression, all of which are currently dramatically restricted in Russia. We're also supporting campaigns around human rights in Pakistan, in Indonesian occupied West Papua, the western half of New Guinea, Uganda, Nigeria. So we are doing an immense amount of work, and it's all about supporting other people in other countries who are leading the fight. It's about us amplifying their voices, publicizing their struggles, helping them when they get arrested to lobby to get them released.
That's an incredible, breathtaking amount of work that you're taking on. Looking back at your incredible career, what would you say you're most proud of?
Well, I think I should really leave that to others, but since you pressed me, I guess I'm proud of the 2 attempted citizens' arrests of the Zimbabwean dictator, Robert Mugabe. Although I got badly bashed and did not succeed, the publicity around my attempts was a great morale boost for democracy activists inside Zimbabwe. You know, they said to me, you know, thank heaven someone's doing something. You know, you've helped raise awareness about the human rights abuses in our country. I think a lot of people who watched the TV news and saw me being beaten unconscious by Mugabe's henchmen concluded that, you know, if Robert Mugabe is prepared to beat unconscious a peaceful protester in broad daylight in the heart of a European capital city in front of the world's media, just imagine what he's doing to his own people when no one is watching. So in hindsight, although I didn't want to get bashed, and it's definitely a bit of brain and eye damage, although I didn't want that, it actually was very good because it really did show and expose the Mugabe regime, which back then in 2001 was not well known and was not being widely reported.
If anyone would like to learn more about that, by the way, the whole event is covered in detail in your documentary, Hating Peter Tatchell, which is on Netflix. So again, please do go and watch that. Share it to all of your friends and family as well. have you got any messages for people watching the Sarah O'Connell Show and your fans around the world?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you who are doing something. Maybe you don't do what I do, but even if you're just writing to your MP or joining a protest or talking to your friends and family, every single little thing helps. And we know that someone who knows a gay person is much more likely to be supportive of LGBT plus rights. So coming out and engaging with people around you in your workplace, in your neighborhood, in your family, that itself is a tremendously valuable thing. You're making a contribution. I'd also say that if sometimes you feel that we're not making enough progress, if you sometimes feel that it's all in vain, please do not lose heart. Sometimes it does take time. Sometimes we have setbacks. So when I think about from 1969 to 1999, we didn't get any law reform for LGBT plus rights in the UK. It seemed like a thankless task. But in the process of the campaigning, what we did was build the momentum that led to 1999 and all the reforms that followed. So, in addition, that build-up helped change public opinion. By engaging with people, whether it be within your own family or circle of friends or workmates, or through campaigns and protests, that activism, that type of activism, whatever it was, it all helped to change public hearts and minds. So that by the mid-1990s, even 4 years in advance of the first law reform, by the 1990s, public opinion was on our side. And we could point to that and say to the politicians, look, public opinion supports LGBT plus rights. Therefore, you can have the confidence that you can change the law and it won't have a backlash. Yeah, you'll have a bit of a backlash, but most people will be on your side. And that is, I think, what really emboldened MPs to make those reforms from 1999 onwards. We were able to show that public opinion supported LGBT plus rights.
Peter Tatchell, I want to thank you for a lifetime of courage and bravery and inspiration and helping to change the lives of countless LGBT plus people all around the world. And thank you so much for coming on my show today. It's been an absolute honor speaking to you.
Well, likewise, Sarah, thank you for the work you do, and through this program that you run, getting the messages out to people to share stories, create awareness, build solidarity. All these things are so important. I always say that I do my bit, but so do many others. And it's together that we make the change. So I'll just finish perhaps with my motto, which I hope will encourage and give people hope and confidence. Don't accept the world as it is, dream of what the world could be, and then help make it happen. Thank you.
I absolutely love that. And thank you again to Peter Tatchell, and to everybody watching at home. Be sure to share, subscribe, give this video a big thumbs up, and leave lots of lovely comments. I'll see you all again for another episode of the Sarah O'Connell Show, and of course at your Pride Parade and the picnic with the party. And happy Pride Month to everybody at home. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, look, you take care and thank you. Lots of love to you.